NBA draft has come and gone in 2015, so the question is, who had a good night and who didn't? Brandon Robinson of Shadow League Digital and an ESPN contributor stopped by to provide some perspective on the talent acquisition process. So, Brandon, first of all, thank you for spending part of your afternoon to recap the 2015 NBA Draft with us this afternoon on the Two Man Advantage podcast.
Man, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on the Two Man Advantage, man.
So, when we look at the top of the draft, obviously, Karl Anthony Towns goes number 1, and he goes to Minnesota. And he joins that explosive young talent group of Ricky Rubio and Andrew Wiggins. So can you just tell me, give me a thumbnail on the future you think of the team that represents the land of 1,000 lakes, buddy?
Definitely a 1,000 lakes and thousands of talent on that team, man. Karl Anthony Towns joins a team that was loaded with obviously good shooters, good point guard play, and Rubio. I think Rubio just needed the right bodies around him to really do what he does. I think one of the things that Towns will benefit from at face value will be a Kevin Garnett, who was a youngster coming into the league out of Farragut Academy in Chicago, but he gets that veteran leadership, kind of similar to the Nets or now the Portland Trailblazers, Mason Plumlee, who got that mentoring from Kevin Garnett. So I think that's an added bonus. But Andrew Wiggins, the Rookie of the Year, wasn't expected to be at first, but that trade from Cleveland to Minnesota definitely put some life into him and gave him something to play for. It's a young group of guys. It's funny. I actually talked with Karl Anthony Towns. I was actually in the back when he spoke with Coach Flip Saunders on the phone, and obviously the ownership and brain trust there. And he said, "Man, we're going to the playoffs." And you like that. You like that energy and that confidence from a young guy, 19 years old, playing at Kentucky under John Calipari. And I think that team is definitely slated to do some things. It kind of reminds me of a more mature and younger LA Clippers from last decade.
And when we look at when the draft really got started, obviously for weeks, the debate for the Lakers was, do they go big with Jahlil Okafor or do they take the point guard D'Angelo Russell? Obviously, they chose Russell. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on what the Lakers did shaking up the draft at number 2.
Well, from all indications, the Lakers never gave Jahlil Okafor the go-ahead that they were going to select him number 2. I do think that Russell brings a big guard that can both distribute and score into the mix. I think that the Lakers are banking on obviously solidifying their big situation by getting somebody either via free agency or via trade. So I think that Russell pick was something that the Lakers, both quietly and in some circles, people knew that was who they were going to pick up. They knew they were going to get Russell. So it's kind of just forming the rest of the segmented pieces of the puzzle and figuring out how they're going to accommodate Kobe Bryant, who's entering his last year in that mega contract that he signed. I think that Russell is a good piece, but they still are a young team. I think there's an identity that they don't have yet. They still have Jeremy Lin on the books, and they still have some other pieces on the books that they need to figure out what people's role is under, Byron Scott, head coach of the LA Lakers.
When we look at what the Philadelphia 76ers did at number 3, obviously Okafor fell to them, but they already have a gluttony of front court players. So how do you foresee the 76ers building their squad, particularly because General Manager Sam Hickey says he wants everyone in Philadelphia to believe in the process. So can you tell me, should Sixers fans trust in the process?
If you're looking at face value, I was a little perplexed as to why they got rid of Michael Carter-Williams when they made that break in Milwaukee. But I think the pick of Joel Embiid, I think that was more a look the pick of Jahlil Okafor was more to mask the possibility that Joel Embiid may not play, or that Joel Embiid will not be as effective as once believed.
Yeah, because of his injury, right?
Yes, yeah, and I think that when it's all said and done, I think that Philadelphia is still looking to make some major trade or some, I guess. They have Miss Cleo. They asked Miss Cleo in her crystal ball what the end result will be, but it just seems like they just love the draft. I think that Nerlens Noel is a piece that it's like you can really play him at the 3 or the 4 or stretch 5 when you want to go small. But I just think that I like Jahlil Okafor because I think that he was the most complete player I think he was more of a complete player in the draft. I think that if Karl Towns was not in the draft, I could have seen Jahlil Okafor going first. But I think that Karl Towns is intriguing because he fits that Minnesota team so well. And I think that Jahlil Okafor, I don't really know his role. I don't really know his role on that team. I know that the Sixers got a stockpile of picks in the second round. And that complements obviously picking Okafor third in the draft, but people think that Jahlil Okafor was not excited to be drafted by the Sixers. I think that's just his personality. He's very just very mellow and ho hum, but I got a chance to speak with him after he was drafted, and I said Moses Malone, and I named some of the other centers that played for the Philadelphia 76ers, and he said it was a joy, number one, to be selected in the NBA, but more importantly that a team would want him on their roster. So I kind of think it's a wait and see attitude, but I really don't know what the Sixers are going to do. Sam Hinkie, like I said, must be communicate with Miss Cleo because she has the final answer on all picks.
Now, when we look at the draft as a whole, in your opinion, who got the best value pick and who left you scratching your head a little bit?
I really like Justice Winslow going to Miami.
I wanted the Pistons to take him. Anyway,
I'm sure you did. Y'all did get Stanley Johnson though, which is not a bad pick. But
Miami kind of fell into that pick, right? Because Charlotte went with Kaminsky. And then the Pistons, obviously, which we'll talk about later, went with Johnson. But you thought Miami got the best value pick?
Yeah, I think that, obviously Dwayne Wade signed that 1 year, $20 million tender, or rather agreed in principle to that $20 million deal with the Miami Heat over one season. I think people were trying to figure out whether, Dwayne Wade was going to go to Cleveland or, was he going to go elsewhere. Nobody else wanted to pay that deal to Dwayne Wade. He's 33 years old. LeBron James left the year before. All those questions, right? So you have Justice Winslow, who had a good season in the NBA, or rather in the NCAA tournament, and he comes to a Miami team that already they re-signed Dragic to a multi-year deal at point guard. I thought that he was a definitely a good pickup for Miami. And then you come into Dwayne Wade. Does Chris Bosh get better? Is he coming back healthy in training camp post sitting out this season? What is Eric Spoelstra going to do as far as coaching and reaching in his bag of tricks to get this team motivated and up and running? And then also you have 2016, the year that more guys are going to be coming out in free agency. So do you go after a Kevin Durant? I think that Miami is prepping, looking 2-3 years down the line. You got Shabazz Napier in the draft last year. So you keep just stockpiling draft picks and you keep growing. But I really felt that Justice Winslow pick was a good pick. I also think the Nets getting Hollis Jefferson was a good pick. I think that's the most athletic small forward that team has had in the draft since Richard Jefferson. And no pun intended, they're both names. Last name is Jefferson. Maybe they're the same tribe or something. But
karma, I guess, huh?
What you say?
I said karma, I guess, huh?
Yeah, right.
So when we look at the draft, who left you scratching your head at the end of the night?
I mean, it's the popular pick, but the Knicks picking up a certain Porzingis guy. The Knicks, I think Is it a situation? Obviously, in drafts, you're always picking based off of potential. Don't get me wrong, but at number 4, most people are looking. The Knicks don't have a good track record of picking internationally. They got burned about a decade ago doing that. But it's people are in Phil we trust mode where everybody's depending
Well,
on
they
Phil.
won't trust him after this pick. No.
Yeah, I mean, and you got some people upset. Obviously, they booed Porzingis, but I mean, it takes time. Anybody that comes out of that European system, it takes a couple years to really acclimate themselves and adjust. I think everybody's banking on this Dirk Nowitzki comparison, this Pau Gasol comparison. Um, I think that what I think the Knicks did to redeem themselves is they did pick up Jerry Grant, who is familiar with the triangle offense. Obviously, his uncle played in the triangle offense. But I think that you give up Tim Hardaway Jr. I don't think the Knicks had the best draft. I think that it's confusing to people like Carmelo Anthony, who reportedly from Stephen A. Smith was unhappy with the pick, who is 31 years old and wants to win now. He's in his prime. And it's kind of like counterintuitive because you have a situation where you have a 31-year-old superstar on your team and you're drafting young. That's what happens when you take the money and you are entrusting that the brain trust is going to go after what you think they're going to go after. I think that, Porzingis at face value is almost a replication of Andrea Bargnani. So it's like, and I know you know a little bit about that being in Canada.
I
Andrea
do.
Bargnani.
Now, when you look at the entirety of the draft, 5 years in that, 5 years from now, when we grade it, who do you think will have the biggest impact on their respective team?
I think Towns. Will. I think that D'Angelo Russell will. I think Frank Kaminsky will. And I also think Cameron Payne will. I like Cameron Payne. I like his confidence. And I like his just his he seems sound. I think he's a guy who grew up just always having to prove people that he belonged. And, going into a situation where, he's backing up Russell Westbrook, and he's having to prove himself all over again. I don't bet against a guy like that. Kind of reminds me of Willie Beeman in Any Given Sunday. I like Devin Booker in Phoenix. I think that was a good pick. I just think that this draft, for as much as people look at it as it was confusing or, after picks one, after the number 1 pick, I just think that this draft really is a culmination. Like, if you look at the way basketball is that is positionless basketball. You have so many guys that can do so many things and look up to certain stars that are still in the league and are looking to be mentored by those guys. And that's a scary thing where you already have a Swiss Army knife of skills that you can use, and you're only looking to get better. And some of the favorite stars that are in the league are still playing. I like a guy like the Chicago Bulls' Bobby Portis. That guy's just looking for a role. He's looking to shine. He's looking to do well. And he's also in a situation where he can come in Chicago and be a factor right away under new head coach by Fred Hoiberg.
Now, I have one off-beat question for you in terms of when kids are allowed to declare for the draft. Obviously, the NBA has a rule now where they have to attend 1 year of college, but I'm interested to know your perspective on the one and done rule and whether you think it's good for both the college game and the NBA.
Well, when I was in college, I actually did an independent study on that, where I looked at Brandon Jennings, who after going to college at Oak Hill Academy, didn't have the GPA or the grades or the SAT scores to go to Arizona, and he went to Italy and played for a Benetton league or Benetton team for a year. And I actually think that made him a better player, kind of similar to Emmanuel Mudiay, selected by the Denver Nuggets, who went to China and played. And I think he got better by having just practice. I think sports is a lot like acting, where you don't have to go to acting school when you're an actor, but you're not going to college per se, but you're growing. I think that even as journalists, it's all about the reps. It's all about the constant just grind, and then when those big opportunities come, you seize them because you've been in constant practice. I think that in the high school to pros generation, the post high school to pros generation, where everybody thought that they could just go into the NBA and perform, i.e., the Darius Mileses of the world and Leon Wood, I think his name was, where a lot of these scouts have not seen these guys play. I think 1 year where the guys who are identified in high school as the next great, it gives scouts an opportunity to really look and see and assess whether these guys are ready. And in the second wave of the AAU generation that we're in, I think that, and with the internet, YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and all those other things, I think it gives people a clear definition of who is talented and who is not. And I think now it's not who is talented and who is not. It's more of who fits. Because now you have guys who have the talent, but maybe they have some other background issues. So now it gives the scouts enough time to really assess the talent. But then you have directors of security who I speak to regularly who say, now it's a situation where they need to look at, see if their backgrounds fit. Because you don't want to, what do they say? It's never the person, it's the people they bring around them. So it gives everybody an effort to really assess whether a guy is a good fit for a team.
And when you look at what we deal with here locally, here in Windsor and Detroit, our viewership is primarily interested in what the Toronto Raptors did and the Pistons as well in Detroit. So I'm wondering if you could give me just a brief synopsis of what you thought both of those teams did in the draft.
Well, let's start off with the Pistons. I really like what they did getting Stanley Johnson, a guy out of Arizona who's a good rebounder. I believe he's 6'6", 6'7", has a 7-foot wingspan. I think he's an athletic big, and I think he is on the same level as a Kelly Oubre and some of those other small forwards that were in the draft. Kind of reminds me of a cross between Trevor Ariza, Tayshaun Prince, and a Carmelo Anthony all in one. I think he's a good defensive wing that they're trying to build as the cornerstone of their franchise. The Pistons haven't been to a playoffs in a few years, and I think they're trying to rebuild that tradition under head coach Stan Van Gundy. And then in the second round, that the Pistons did pick up Deron Hilliard out of Villanova. So they got two Wildcats in the draft, two different Wildcats, but in Villanova and Arizona. But Deron Hilliard is a guy that is a good shooter, can shoot a lot of from the 3-point line, and I believe he shot about 45% field goal percentage, and I think from the 3-point line shot 36.5%. If you're a good guard out of Villanova playing under Jay Wright, you'll be able to translate into the NBA, in my opinion. And then the Toronto Raptors, they got DeLon Wright, the younger brother of Dorell Wright, a guy out of Utah, another athletic big, or rather an athletic point guard that can play the three different positions, the 1, the 2, and the 3. Toronto made a trade and getting rid of Grievous Vasquez, because people were scratching their heads when they got Wright, because they're like, well, why did Toronto get him? I think DeLon Wright will help out Lou Williams if he resigns with Toronto, and defensively, because I think Lou, obviously he can score, but on the weak side, DeLon can help Lou Williams. And I must also add, you told me to be brief, I did like what the Detroit Pistons did in getting Marcus Morris, in trading to get him, or rather Detroit getting Marcus Morris. I think that's going to be a very good sleeper for Detroit as they're trying to rebuild.
And just a couple of follow-ups on the Pistons. What would you say to people that said the Pistons lost out on an opportunity to draft Justice Winslow after they picked Stanley Johnson because they were in desperate need of a small forward who could score?
I would say that the Pistons fans made the same argument when they got Darko Milicic instead of Carmelo Anthony. It's always that regret that the Pistons fans seem to have. I think Justice Winslow fits better in the Miami system than I think Detroit. I think that Justice Winslow is a systems guy, but he's a scorer at will, and I think that I think there's an intrigue about Stanley Johnson because he's not necessarily a name like Justice Winslow is, but neither was Tayshaun Prince, and the Pistons must have liked him because they got him twice in a trade. So I think that Stanley Johnson is a player that they're trying to build their team around. And I think, I know that if I'm not mistaken, he had worked out with the Pistons the first day that players could work out, which I believe was June 4th. So I think that Stanley Johnson is going to be a mainstay and a name that Pistons fans are going to be familiar with for years to come.
And finally, Brandon, I'm wondering if you could give me your assessment on your biggest takeaway from this year's NBA draft.
Well, it's kind of like what I said before. I think small ball and positionless basketball is the wave. I think that point guard play is something that every team needs. It's a point guard's league. It's no longer a big man's game, a traditional big man's game, I'll say, because I think Jahlil Okafor is a Tim Duncan type player, and I think he'll be a mainstay because he plays like him. But I think that this year's draft was really a draft that people will look back on 15, 20 years from now and say, okay, that there was an impact on that team. I think similarly to the 2005 draft, where you had certain guys who are now benefiting respective teams. So I think this year is a year that you'll look back years from now and say, oh my, there were some talent that came out of that draft.
Well, Brandon, we thank you for your time this afternoon and chatting up the NBA draft with us here on the Two Man Advantage podcast.
Brother, thank you for having me.
Have a good day.
You too, man.